Hello everyone, how are you doing today? Hope you all had a good 2 weeks since the last teaching video, and hope you're all doing well. Hope you're having a really good day today. What I want to do today is to build upon what we talked about in the last couple of videos. And just so you know, these teaching videos they're a new thing. And so this is the third one, and they're all on YouTube. They're uploaded to YouTube. And so go on to the YouTube channel and subscribe. That way you'll know when they're uploaded. Right now it's every 2 weeks, and eventually they're going to be every week, but right now every 2 weeks. And my goal is to build up on what we've talked about. So there's, successive revelation, and there's layers, and we go deeper and deeper into what we're talking about. So also, let me tell you, there's a couple of social media pages. There's the Based on Faith. It's on Facebook, so go there, and you can follow and get weekly. There's some periodic postings weekly to encourage you as it relates to your faith and just your Christian walk. Also, there's Instagram. It's official_Instagram. I'm sorry, official_ based on faith. And so that's actually something that is fairly new, like within the last, I would say, couple of months. It hasn't been around that long, but Facebook has been there for like years. And then YouTube is something that we've just started uploading and posting videos on as well. So anyway, I want to utilize some of these methods to reach you and encourage you. Okay, so we have been talking about faith and the foundation of faith. First of all, let me tell you what we will get to today. So our goal for today is to talk about when we're actually walking in obedience as it relates to faith, but obedience really with anything as it relates to your Christian walk. So when you're walking in obedience as opposed to walking in sacrifice as it relates to faith, and we'll get into really what that means. But when we start walking in obedience, which is where we need to be aware that there's going to be resistance and there's going to be evil strategies to come against our ability and our active obedience. So, all right, so what I'm going to do is I've got some notes here about what we talked about in video 1 and video 2. And so I'm just going to review those quickly. So if you are watching and you haven't watched the first 2, go back and watch those, but you can still continue watching this one because I'm going to go over it just enough so you'll have an idea of what we talked about, but certainly go back because there's more detail there. Okay, so we started really in Hebrews 11. We started Hebrews 11:1, and again, I say this all the time, but Hebrews 11 is my absolute favorite chapter in the entire Bible. I mean, they're all my favorite, but this is really my favorite. So let me just read Hebrews 11:1, because this is a really good starting point that gives us a definition of what faith is. It helps us to understand what it is and the concept of faith. So and this is the Passion Translation. It says, "Now faith brings our hopes into reality and becomes the foundation needed to acquire the things we long for. It is all the evidence required to prove what is still unseen." Okay, so couple of things here that I'll point out. Again, go back to video 1 and 2. Hope is for the future. Okay, that's really important. The future is always out there. There's always the future. And we know that Jeremiah 29:11 tells us that we have a hope in a future. That's something I say all the time when I am faced with something. Nope, that's not true, because the Bible says in Jeremiah 29:11, I have a hope in a future. So I quote that all the time. But hope is for the future, okay? Because we live in the dimension of time, we have, past, and we have present, which is right now. We have the future. There's 3 possibilities there. Hope is for the future. We haven't gone there yet. We're still right now, and actually every moment. I mean, it's so interesting, but we're always right now. This is where we are. We are never in the future, but what we can do is pull the hopes and the dreams and the desires from the future into now. And so how do we do that? Well, we use faith to do that. Faith is for now. Hope is for the future. And so an example that I gave, I believe it was in video 1, was like the analogy of using a fishing pole. So, we cast our line, we cast it out, and then that's hope. It's out there, it's out into the future, but when we start reeling it in, that's faith. So faith pulls in the hope from the future. They work together, but we can always have hope, and we can always have these dreams and the desires and the promises that God has given us for the future. But if we don't use faith, and if we don't have a foundation of faith, they're always going to be hanging out there in the future. They are never going to be realized. And so, I believe it's in Proverbs where it says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. And so that's not a good thing. We don't want our hearts to be sick. We're supposed to guard our hearts. And honestly, faith helps us to guard our hearts, because if we're always having hope deferred and we're never seeing anything into the present, I think it points to the faith foundation. There's something wrong with either the depth or the width, or something is wrong with the faith foundation. So that's our goal here, is we want to dig deeper and go wide and deep. Okay, so faith is the foundation needed to acquire what we hope for. It doesn't say there's anything else mixed in with that. Faith is the foundation, and it's needed to acquire. So it's not an option. It is a prerequisite. So again, we talked about how structures, for example, really tall buildings in the city they're tall, and we can see that visibly with our eyes, but what goes beneath into the ground is just as impressive. In fact, the foundation is wider than that structure, and it goes, it's significant as far as how deep it goes. It goes stories and stories into the ground. So the foundation has to be engineered to handle the scope of that structure. And so look at what your hopes are. Look at the hopes and the dreams and the desires that God has given you. What are they out there? What's the scope of them? And oh goodness. Okay, there we go. What's the scope of that? And how high does that go? What is the vision of that? Whatever that is, your faith is going to have to be wider and deeper. Okay. Okay, so faith must go deep and wide. Look at the things you hope for and make faith go that deep and even wider. Okay? We must move from the sacrifice of faith. This was last week, 2 weeks ago, the last video. We must move from the sacrifice of faith to the obedience of faith. Okay? So we talked about sacrifice is not what God intended for us. Really, obedience was how it was initially structured. In the Garden of Eden, God wanted his creation. He wanted Adam and Eve to just obey him, to walk with him, to trust every word he said, to believe him. What we find is that there was disobedience. Okay, and actually, sacrifice is not really the opposite of obedience. We wouldn't say sacrifice versus obedience. It's not really like that. Sacrifice is actually a direct consequence of disobedience. It is a result of that. So sacrifice is really a covering up or a substitute. And so obedience is really what God desires. So we did read this verse in the last video. It's 1 Samuel 15:22. I'm going to read it so we can, we can hear it. And then I'm going to go over the story of what happened with King Saul as it relates to this verse. So this is the Amplified version. It says, "Has the Lord as great a delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obedience to the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams." Of course, heed means to obey. So what he's saying here, Samuel is saying this. Samuel is the prophet, okay? And he says obedience is better than sacrifice. So how does this relate to faith? Well, let's first go over this, story of what happened with King Saul. So what we know is the Israelites came out of Egypt, and a group of people, the Amalekites, their nation, opposed Israel. Okay, they opposed God's people. So what happens is God tells Saul to destroy the entire Amalekite nation, all of them, this is key. He tells, these are the instructions: destroy the entire Amalekite nation. The men, the women, the children, the babies, the cattle, the sheep, the goats, everything, the camels, the donkeys. Okay, so Saul established an army. He did go and attack the Amalekites. He killed most of them. He killed the people, but he actually spared somebody's life. He spared King Agag's life, and he took him captive when he should have killed him. That was not under the instructions, right? That's outside the scope. He used his own discretion, and he did what he thought should have happened. So here one thing, he spared King Agag's life and took him captive. Also, he did not kill all of their animals and their livestock. He spared the best of their cattle and sheep, and the fat calves and the lambs. And so what was his justification for doing this? Well, he kind of obeyed. I mean, he obeyed partially, right? But he did not obey fully and completely. So how did Saul, what was his explanation for this? So he said, he destroyed what was worthless or of poor quality. So he, in his own mind and his own discretion, said, all right, these people, I'm going to kill them. I'm going to kill these animals, this livestock, but I'm going to spare the king's life. I'm just going to take him captive, and I'm also going to spare the best of the the animals as well. He kept the best, what he thought was the best. So God was angry with Saul because of his disobedience. And one thing that I think is key here is when we're talking about obedience, and I tell this to my children too, is that partial obedience is actually disobedience. And also delayed obedience is actually disobedience. So we have to obey right when we're told to at that right time, and we have to obey fully and completely. So Samuel the prophet, he confronted Saul, and Saul tried to make a really great excuse for his disobedience. So what he said was that he had spared the best of the animals because he thought that it would be a good thing to sacrifice them to the Lord. So he thought this would be a noble thing to say, at least, that these animals can be sacrificed to the Lord. And so even though, this is a key here, even though Saul tried to make his disobedience appear to be noble, at least in like human logic, it was still disobedience. So it can look good and it can look noble, and it actually could be a good thing if it were not for the disobedience. So in any other case, that might have been a good thing, but God specifically told him to destroy all, right? Destroy the entire nation, including the animals and the king, etc. So, as it relates to faith, obedience is better than sacrifice. And again, we're applying this to faith, but just, in everything, in your walk with the Lord, obedience is better than sacrifice. But as it relates to faith, sometimes believing God for the impossible, which is faith, a lot of times it's believing for the impossible, is a struggle, right? It's a struggle because it looks so impossible, and you see and you hear and you touch, and with your natural senses you can perceive everything that is going against what this thing is out here God's telling you, this impossible thing. Sacrifice is aligned with struggle and also substituting something for something else. So sacrifice, again, is the direct consequence of disobedience, which is what we don't want. We want obedience. So we need to move our walk of faith from sacrifice to obedience. And obedience is just saying, I fully trust you, God. I hear your voice. I know who you are. I know your character. I have a relationship with you. I trust what you say. What you say, it has to be true because you are true. You cannot lie. All these things. You have to move from the sacrifice, which is the doubt. How in the world could this ever happen? How could this be? I mean, so these are the things that as it relates to pulling in the promises, looking at these natural circumstances or looking at conventional man-made wisdom versus just obeying God, right? So we have to know that it is a settled issue. It's settled. It's not up for debate. It's completely settled. If God said it, that's it, period. I do it. My answer is yes, period. I do it. Yeah, there's no what ifs, there's no hows, there's no, but what if this, anything like that. So, a verse that I really, really like is Psalms 119:89. In the Amplified Version, it says, forever, forever. There's no end, there's no break. Forever. O Lord, thy word is settled in heaven. It stands firm as the heavens. So the word of the Lord is settled. It's not up for debate. It is, period. So what I want to do is move on to some new revelation today. Okay, so what happens when you actually move from the sacrifice to the obedience of faith? Well, the enemy, Satan, does not like that, of course, and so I think it's really foolish, and I think that we're setting ourselves up for failure if we do not know that there's going to be evil strategies out there that come against us. We have to know that. I mean, this is, when we think of like our military, protecting our nation, or in times of war, I mean, we look and we don't say, just because we're doing what we need to do doesn't mean the enemy's going to have attacks against us or some kind of strategy. I mean, that would be silly. So the same is true here, because the enemy wants to defeat us. And so, but what I'll say to you is that we have every ability to be victorious. Okay, so that's the good news. But we have to know, and we have to be aware, and we have to have a strategy ourselves. Okay, so when we are obeying, the enemy will try to come and prevent us in some way from obeying. Satan and his workers, so his entourage of evil spirits, his demons, want to come against us. It's their job. That is their mission, is to come against us and try to create our downfall and our destruction. So they know that obedience is better than sacrifice, and this produces great results. Okay, so if the enemy can't stop you from moving from the sacrifice stage, we'll call it the sacrifice stage, to the obedience stage, he will try to thwart your actual act of obedience. So we have to be aware. We have to be on guard. We have to be alert. We can't be asleep. We can't be passive. This is a strategy, so we have to be prepared. So what do we do? Okay, first of all, we have to recognize this is a strategy. It's going to happen. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter, your history. It doesn't matter anything about you. This is a strategy from the enemy. The enemy is desperate for you to fall back into disobedience and into doubt and unbelief. The enemy wants to keep you there. So if he can keep you there, he can steal from you. He can steal what God has for you and his plans for you. So know this is going to come. So be prepared, okay? We have to renew our minds daily. This will help us each day. We have to be transformed. We know there's great verses there. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So make your mind new each day, and don't be conformed to what's out there in the world, but be transformed. So like my children have these transformer toys, so it goes completely from one thing to another. It can be like an action hero to a car or something. So it's completely different when it's transformed. And that is what we do with our minds by putting the Word of God into our minds every day. This Word is living, and it's active, and it's spirit, and it's life, and we put that into our minds. And we know the progression, what we put into our minds. So as a man think is in his heart, so is he. So what we put into our minds is what is going to come out of our mouth. It's what we're going to speak, and what we speak, obviously, we know we're going to follow in action, and what we speak, actually, we prophesy over ourselves, whether it's good or evil. So let's get to the example of Abram in Genesis 15. Okay, here's for today, what I feel like will help illustrate in the revelation for us today. Okay, so Abram has a 25-year journey from when God called him. He was already 75 years old. Sarai, his wife, was 65. God told him, I'm going to take you to this land. I'm going to give you this promised land. I'm going to make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. They're going to be countless as the sands on the seashore. Just look up and see this vision, and this is what your descendants are going to be. They're going to be this numerous. I'm going to make nations out of you. Kings are going to come out of you. And so this is what has been, prophesied by God himself to Abram. Okay, but it's been a walk. So Abram has gone year after year after year after year, and then there's a decade, and then there's a 15 years that go by, and then so all of this time, he's getting older. He was already old to begin with. Sarah was already old to begin with, and Sarah had been barren her entire life. She could not have children. And then when she's 65, God says she's going to have, a baby. She's going to have the promised son. She's already decades, maybe not quite decades, but almost decades past being able to conceive and have children. But here is Abraham saying, okay, all right, I'm going to go, and I'm going to travel to this place I've never been. I'm going to go, and you see his journey, all of this that happens to him. And we're at this point where it has been years, okay? And Abraham is still on this journey, this walk of faith. And what happens is Abraham still has no son, okay? And Abraham is talking to God, and he says, God, you promised me. I'm waiting. I'm walking. I'm trusting. But right now, here's what things look like. My trusted servant, my most trusted servant, Eliezer, is going to be my sole heir, not a son of my own body. And so God answers, and he promises Abraham again, no, Abraham, I already told you, and my word is true. You are going to have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. Just look up. Look at all the stars in the sky. Get a vision for how many stars are there. You can't even count them all. This is how many descendants you're going to have. And we see in verse 5, I'm not going to go into this so much today, but I really like verse 5 there, where it says, and Abraham trusted every word. He trusted every word. And this is really a key. And because of this, it was credited to him as righteousness. So that'll be for another video. But anyway, Abram trusted every word that God spoke to him. And so God continued to recount for Abraham, look, Abraham, I'm going to remind you, here's everything we've done so far. Here's where you came from, and here's where you are. I brought you out of Ur, out of the most wicked place, total wickedness, idolatry. This is where you came from, and look where you are now. I brought you here to possess this land and keep this promise in front of you. So Abraham asked, how can I be sure that I can possess this land? How can I be sure? So then what does God do? He doesn't really answer him. What he does is he gives him an instruction. So God instructs Abram to bring a heifer, a female goat, a ram, a turtle dove, pigeon, and to kill them and cut them in half except for the birds, and to lay each half, there's some instructions for this, lay each half opposite and in 2 rows. So Abram obeyed exactly. Okay, that's a key here. Abram obeyed exactly. He's not, this is a sacrifice, but the point here is that he's not in his faith walk, he's not doing it in sacrifice. He's actually obeying the instructions of the Lord here. So there's a distinction there. He's obeying in faith the instruction of the Lord. He obeyed exactly. What happened then? What it says is that in verse 11, so this is Genesis 15:11, vultures swooped down upon the carcasses. Interesting. Like immediately as he's obeying and he's doing this fully and completely, vultures swoop down upon the carcasses. Then it says, but Abram stood there and he drove the vultures away. Interesting, right? So here's what I want to pull out from this. So the vultures swooped down upon the carcasses. They're birds of prey. So this is, I believe, this is symbolic, and it's a symbolism of the enemy coming and attempting to interfere with the covenant he has with God, and specifically with what we're talking about here, with Abram's obedience. So the enemy, as soon as he obeys fully and completely, the enemy comes to swoop down and try to take the carcasses so he cannot actually obey. But what did Abram do? He stood there and he drove the vultures away. So he stood there. He didn't back down. He didn't allow them to do this, to take it away. He did not allow this interference to actually take place. He drove them away. He stood there and he drove them away. Okay, so when we step into covenant with God and we obey, it is important to stand on the promise, which is our faith. And we drive away the fears, the doubt, and the unbelief, and the enemy from preventing us from obeying. We will obey. It's settled. So Abram stood there and he drove the vultures away. So I want to end with this because I think this is a lot for today. We'll pick up next time with our teaching video number 4. I'm going to end with Ephesians 6:13. Actually, I'm going to show you this. So this picture here, ignore I have handwritten notes all over this, but this is the armor of God. And this is in Ephesians 6:13, and this is the King James Version. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. And what did Abraham do here as he's obeying? The vultures came down, swooped down, but Abram stood there. He stood. And so this is what Ephesians tells us to do. When we keep on the full armor of God, we have the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, the belt of truth, the shield of faith, the sword of the Spirit, and the feet of peace. And so we keep that on and we stand, no matter what comes against us, to prevent us from doing what we're supposed to do in obedience to the Word of God. So, and I think also looking at the shield of faith here, what does the shield of faith actually do? It's one of the pieces of armor. It quenches all the fiery darts of the enemy that comes at you. So it quenches all the fiery darts. So you stand there in faith and it quenches the fiery darts of the enemy. So that's what Abraham did. And so he obeyed the voice of the Lord in faith, and he stood there. So that's where I want to end it for today. So I hope that encourages you. Go back and rewatch the video. Rewatch it, take notes, share it with share it with people that you love, that you want to encourage. And again, remember, you can go on to our website, basedonfaith.org. There's a lot of articles there that I've written over the years that are posted. There's also the Facebook Based on Faith page, where weekly there's encouraging posts relating to faith and the Christian walk. And there's also Instagram, which is official_based on faith, and Twitter as well. And then don't forget, these videos are uploaded to our YouTube channel, so go there and you can subscribe. And then you'll be alerted right away, because they are uploaded usually a day or two before they're posted on social media. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. I hope that your foundation is going deeper, and actually send us messages. You can actually email info@basedonfaith.org. You can email questions. You can email, if this has touched you in any way. We'd like to hear your feedback. And also, if there's anything that you want me to teach on, I'm interested in hearing that as well. So send us all of that. And wishing you the best week. And I send you love and blessings. Bye-bye.